Hello everyone and welcome to an amazing game from round 8 of this year's FIDE World Rapid Steam Championship. It is Magnus Carlsen versus Javokhir Sindarov. So the former world classical champion faces the World Chess Championship challenger. We all know that Sindarov will face Gukesh in the match for World Classical Championship in November. And it's one of the matchups that we're all looking forward to see how anyone, who is doing well does against Magnus, who is currently a bit out of shape. Magnus going into this round suffered 2 losses already. He had the first 4 rounds were okay for him, 2 draws, 2 wins, but then he lost that beautiful game to Arjun Ergasi where Arjun sacrificed the queen, and then also lost to Shan Sargsyan. Whereas Javokhir, he's doing, incredibly well. He only has that loss to Richard Rapport that we've shown on the channel, but I mean, that was some crazy pirate stuff, and other than that, he's doing really well, coming off of a victory off of Nicolas Teodoru. Now he faces Magnus with black. So can he do what Arjun did, beat Magnus Carlsen with the black pieces? Let's check it out. It's really a wild game. So Magnus opens with pawn to d4. We have pawn to d5 and pawn to c4. The queen's gambit followed by pawn to e6. The queen's gambit declined. Knight f3. We have knight to f6. And Magnus opts for the Catalan. We have pawn to g3. D captures on c4 and bishop to g2. This is the closed Catalan. And with bishop to b4 check, we go into one of the main lines. Knight b to d2 and pawn to b5. We have castles, and there are some moves that really make sense here, like castles or pawn to a5, but Javokhir goes for bishop to b7. And this is a line you really have to know by heart, otherwise you're just gonna do crazy stuff here. And you could go for the standard pawn to a4, that's what we usually do, but Magnus goes for knight captures on c4. And we can give this sort of not a double exclamation mark, but we can give it an exclamation mark, because even though he does give up a piece, it's only temporary, or it should be only temporary. So b captures on c4, we have queen to a4 check and knight to c6. Okay, you block check, you defend the bishop on b4, and now there are 2 ways you can play this. And the reason I have to mention this is because you either go one way or the other. You cannot go both ways, and Magnus does exactly that. Now, one way you could play is queen b5. It's, again, a line that you really have to know by heart, or you will mess it up. And after rook to b8, you go knight e5, which makes sense. A triple attack on the knight here, you're winning your piece back. For example, castles kingside, knight captures on c6, bishop captures, you're going to play queen captures, and after queen captures on d4, the line really goes on. Bishop to e3 attacks the queen, queen captures on b2, queen captures on c4, and now after bishop to d6, you can go bishop captures on a7. So it's a line where white will sacrifice a pawn. For the moment, it's equal material, but you can go rook b4, attack the queen, and now once the queen moves, you will capture on e2, and then white starts advancing the past a pawn. So white is down a pawn, but with the bishop pair and the outside pass pawn, this is definitely compensation for the sacrifice material. But Magnus goes knight e5, which is in fact the top engine move recommended by the engine. Bit of a weird sentence, but there it is. And now knight to d5 by Javokhir, saying, okay, you can capture on c6, but my bishop on b4 is defended. And the way you play this is really just by going after this knight, which is not defended twice. You have to capture it, and then after queen d7, now you cannot move the knight, you will play bishop captures on d5. You have to give up your Catalan bishop and then recapture on b4. Something like e captures, queen captures on b4, queen captures on c6, and now you continue with either b3 or bishop to f4, and this is perfectly fine. But that being said, black doesn't have any issues here, and black solved everything in the opening. But Magnus played knight e5 and queen to b5, and these 2 together, we can't really say that it doesn't work, because it does work, but you have to be like Rashid Nejmedinov to pull this off. And okay, we have pawn to a6, saying you either move your queen or you capture, and then I'm going to trap your queen. And Magnus goes queen captures on b7. You can see that he burned quite a lot of time getting to this position, so he's remembering something, just not all of it. And Javokhir goes for knight to a5, and the queen is now trapped. You have to you have to capture on d5. There's no other way to play it. So bishop captures on d5. We have knight captures on b7, and bishop captures on b7 attacks the rook here. rook to b8, going after the bishop, and bishop to c6 check. We have king f8, and now bishop to f3, preparing knight to c6. So Magnus will win more material here, and there's no real good way to get out of this, because if you go rook to b6, then just bishop to e3 is very, very annoying. You will have to give up that rook at some point, or you could even go rook to c8, but this is now even lost, because you will see knight c6 with a double attack, and after queen d6, just a3, and there's no way to defend the bishop on b4. So Javokhir says you can have the rook. It just goes bishop to d6. We have knight c6, queen to e8, and Magnus gobbles up the rook. We have captures, and pawn to e4. And this is the position that Magnus saw when he decided to sacrifice the queen. So he has a light square bishop and the rook for the queen. And some good chances here, because the c pawn is doubled, so it could be a little bit weak, but you have to play this is now, we could say equal. Black should be a little bit better. He has the queen, but yeah, if you somehow get a passed pawn with these two pawns and you position your bishops properly, you will be able to escort that pawn. Javokhir strikes with pawn to e5, saying, okay, I would like you to capture, and then my bishop will be beautifully placed here. Magnus goes bishop to e3, and now you cannot capture on b2. If you capture on b2, then simple rook b1, and you will have problems here. So after bishop to e3, Javokhir goes king to e7. He doesn't want to lose the rook on h8. Rook 8 to b1, and now rook to d8. We could say that Javokhir, with this rook to d8 move, finishes development, and Magnus still has to figure out how to make his pieces fully operational. We have pawn to d5. This frees up the dark square bishop, and these two pawns are fairly strong, so not easy to break through this. But Javokhir finds the only way to do it. He plays queen to b4. We have rook f to c1, and now rook to b8. And this is the only way to do it. You want to play c3, and it doesn't matter what white plays. If you play rook captures, then the queen will capture the rook, with the rook on b1 being undefended. Or if you capture with this pawn, then of course queen captures rook, and you will just grab the two rooks for the queen, and you will be left a rook and bishop versus a bishop pair. So Magnus plays pawn to a3. The only way to play this, the only way, is to play pawn to b3. And then the game goes on. Something like c3, then rook c2, you're going to go c6, and then after captures, you will win the back the pawn. Let's say rook f to d1, and rook captures. And this pawn is now defended, and black is the only one playing this for a win. You will play a5, a4, break open the position on b3. And whether you win or not, that's up to you. But Magnus plays a3, and he completely paralyzes himself. Now Javokhir plays queen to c3, queen to b3, and rook to c3 is never possible, because the queen just captures the rook, and you pick up both of the rooks. So here we have king to g2 by Magnus, and now c3. Again, with the same idea. If rook captures, you're just going to capture. So bishop to d1, we have queen to c4, and now pawn to b4. Magnus does get to execute b4, but now the c3 pawn is a passed pawn. And worst of all, you lose the center. And without the center holding the position, there's just nothing here for Magnus. Queen captures on e4. Bishop f3 doesn't really do anything. You do save the pawn, but you will have other problems. That bishop is also very important here. So king g1, and now pawn to a5. If you capture on d5 right away, then you lose the c3 pawn. So Javokhir still waits with that. He plays pawn to a5. And now what do you play? The idea is, of course, that if you capture on c3, then the rook is now hanging. The queen also does a good job of that. So bishop to c2, we have queen captures on d5, and the bishop to b3. We have queen to a8, and now rook captures on c3, a captures, and rook captures on b4. So Javokhir eliminates the e4 pawn, the d5 pawn, and both of the pawns on the queen side, and Magnus is left with basically nothing. We have rook b to c1, but that bishop is doing a beautiful job here. The two rooks are completely useless against it. We have queen to b7, bishop to c2, and now pawn to g6, followed by pawn to h4 and rook to b2. So Magnus really has nothing here. At some point, you will go after the bishop. You will force the bishop to move. You will get to play rook b1. You will trade off one of the rooks, and then you're just gonna, let's say, push the c pawn to victory, or anything really. So rook to c4, we have pawn to f5, now going after the white king as well. bishop to d3, and now rook to b3, attacking the bishop, bishop to g5 check, king to e6, and bishop to c2. Somehow, Magnus is still hoping to do some damage with this bishop pair here. Rook to b2, and we have rook to c3. We have king to d7. Now comes bishop to a4 check, king to e6, and bishop back to c2. So Javokhir still figuring out a way on how to break through here. He goes queen b4, bishop to d3, and now we have pawn to e4. He wants to get the rook all the way to b1, bishop to c4 check, and king to d7. With this d7 square available to the black king, there is no way for Magnus to actually do anything here. So he tries bishop to g8, point being that if he manages to gobble up the kingside pawns, he's back in the game. But now rook to b1. Javokhir manages to trade off a pair of rooks. We have king g1, rook captures, and queen to b2. Now with ideas of going after that f2 pawn with the bishop, the pawn, and the queen, rook to d1, pinning the bishop, and queen to c3, threatening queen f3 check to win the rook on d1. So bishop to e3, stopping that, and now king e7, just unpinning, preparing bishop to c5. We have rook to c1, queen to b2, and now Magnus goes back. If you capture on h7, then just let's say f4, and the queen will trap the bishop on h7. So bishop to c4 by Magnus, and now we have bishop to e5, trying to figure out a way on how to trade off that last remaining material Magnus has. Rook to d1, and now queen c2, attacking the bishop and the rook, so rook c1 is forced, queen to b2, and now rook to d1, followed by bishop back to d6. So Javokhir still needs to calculate a little bit in order to get through, as he's also getting very low on time. Bishop g5 check, king to d7, and bishop back to e3, queen to a3. And Magnus to move, what do you play here? There's really nothing to try other than just being passive, something like bishop to e2, bishop c4, rook to d4, something like that. But he does budge. He plays knight, bishop to g8. He goes after the pawns, and now Javokhir returns to his original plan. Queen to c3, he will move the king, and then he will go bishop to c5. Rook to d4 by Magnus, and now king to e7, unpinning, and now bishop to c5 is just enough for Javokhir to win the game. Magnus captures on h7, but really there is nothing better here. We have bishop to c5, and now bishop to g5 with check. The only way for Javokhir not to win this is to play king e8 and maybe give up the pawn, and then rook d8, and you get some sort of a perpetual here. But of course, he's not going to do that. King to f7 defends the g6 pawn, rook to d7 check, king to e6, and now everything is hanging. The rook is attacked, queen can come attack the bishop if the rook moves, and well, the g7 better, and then the bishop will be lost. But even worse is queen f3 check, and then just going after the f2 pawn. So there are so many threats here, and impossible to handle all of them. Rook captures on c7, for example, you get instant checkmated. King h2, queen captures, king h3, queen f1 check, and then you just come in with the queen, king h3, and queen h1, and that's going to be checkmate. So Magnus tries one last defensive idea. Rook to d2, gets the rook out of harm's way, defends the f2 pawn, but we already said that there were 3 weaknesses in the position, and Javokhir just hones in on the last weakness, and that is the bishop on h7. Plays queen to g7, and he was in this position on move 62 that Magnus Carlsen resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. I even have a video of this, so if you guys want, we can check it out. There we go. Magnus brings the rook back, but the instant bishop to queen to g7, Magnus resigns, and Javokhir not really, impressed or anything. He just shakes his hand and says thank you for the extra point. So yeah, Javokhir doing beautifully. He only lost to Rapport in round 3, but I mean, you've seen that game. And as I was recording this video, I just learned the results from the next round. From round 9, Magnus suffers his fourth loss in a row to Aydin Suleymanli. So Magnus now loses 4 games in a row to Arjun, to Shan Sargsyan, to Javokhir Sindarov, and to Aydin Suleymanli. And the Javokhir continues playing well. He gets a draw in round 9 against none other than another former world champion, Vishwanathan Anand. That's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Tough tournament for Magnus. Previous one as well. He's not his usual self. I mean, he gets excellent positions. He knows so much theory, but then at some point he just gets outplayed. He has this weird blind spots during the game, and as I've already mentioned, Kasparov also talked about that. He started seeing blind spots. He had just. Momentary lapses during the game where his brain just shuts down, and that was the point where he decided to officially retire. But we'll see. Probably Magnus is not retiring anytime soon, with him doing so well overall, and across different time formats, and pushing everything pretty much in the chess world. But we'll see. Not going too well for the former world classical champion. Really hope you enjoyed it. Big congratulations to Javokhir on this impressive run. I would like to thank Gerhard Henkelman, Nelson Donovan, Jonah Kaplan, Vinesh Azalvanan, and Martin Waller for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.